"I am the man who saved the parade," Captain Locke said, loud enough for the whole forecourt to hear him, "and you would all do well to remember it." He said it standing in front of the silent sentry at the Queen's steps, the way a man stands in front of a mirror, looking at the soldier but seeing only himself. I was 3 paces behind him with the order book under my arm, a lieutenant of 2 years and no consequence, and I remember thinking, even then, that he had picked the one listener in the whole palace who would never argue back. The guard at the Queen's steps did not move. He did not blink. He stood with his rifle at the order and his eyes on the middle distance, and let the captain's words break over him like weather. And the mourning crowd, who did not know one tunic from another, decided in that instant that the loud, bright man in the gold-cuffed coat was the hero of the story, and the still one in the bearskin was the furniture. I knew better. I am the one who learned the truth of it, and I am the one who has to tell it now, because the man it belongs to will go to his grave without saying a word. His name was Sergeant Pharaoh Vance, though I did not learn that until later. On the morning Captain Locke first lorded it over him, he was, to me, only number 4 post, the sentry box nearest the Queen's steps, the one that watches the narrow stair where the household comes down to the forecourt for a state mourning. I had been posted to the controller's office a fortnight before. I carried the order book. I copied the duty rolls. I stood where I was told and learned the geography of a great house from the bottom up. And I had been there 2 days earlier, on the morning everyone was now talking about, the morning of the runaway carriage on Coronation approach, though I had seen almost none of it and understood less. Let me tell it the way the palace told it first, so you understand the lie before I unmake it. The approach is the long ceremonial road that runs up to the forecourt from the river gate, lined on a state mourning with railings and people 10 deep. 2 days before, on the rehearsal for the Founding Day Review, a team of 4 greys harnessed to one of the open state carriages had taken fright at the bandstand and bolted full gallop, empty carriage, straight up the approach toward the packed forecourt where 200 people stood between the wall and the rail with nowhere to go. It should have been a catastrophe. It was not. The carriage was turned at the last possible moment into the soft ground of the parade square, the horses brought down and held, no one crushed, no one worse than frightened. By that evening, the whole household knew that a disaster had been averted on Coronation approach. By the next morning the whole household knew, because Captain Locke had told them all, that it was Captain Locke who had averted it. He told it well. I will give him that. He told it in the officers' mess, and he told it in the controller's anteroom, and he told it that morning at the Queen's steps to a sentry who could not even nod. He had seen the team bolt, he said. He had judged the line and the speed in an instant. He had stepped from the dais, taken the lead horse's head, and wrenched the whole flying weight of it off the deadly line and into the soft ground by main strength and nerve, while lesser men stood frozen. A second's hesitation, he liked to say, and you would have had bodies on that road. I do not hesitate. That is the difference between an officer and an ornament. And here he would always look, however briefly, at the nearest motionless guardsman, so that everyone understood which of them was the officer and which the ornament. I believed it. Why would I not? I had been at the far end of the forecourt with the order book. I had heard the screams and the thunder of hooves and seen, through a forest of shoulders, a great confusion of gray and gold down on the square, and then it was over. A captain said he had done it. Captains, I had been taught, do not lie about such things. So when Captain Locke stood at the Queen's steps and said, "I am the man who saved the parade," I wrote nothing down, because it was not my place, and I thought nothing of it, because I did not yet know there was anything to think. The sergeant of the Queen's steps post thought something of it. I know that now, but on that morning he gave no sign at all. The thing about a man who has trained himself never to react is that you stop expecting him to be a person. That is the cruelty of it, and Captain Locke had found it the way a bully always finds the soft place. A guardsman on his post may not speak, may not turn, may not answer a provocation with so much as a flicker, because the discipline of the thing is the whole point of the thing, and so A certain kind of man looks at all that iron self-command and sees not strength but permission. Here is a person who must take whatever I give him. Locke gave him a great deal. Over the next 10 days I watched him do it again and again, and I watched the sergeant take it, and I began, slowly, to feel something turn over in me that I could not yet name. It became a habit of the captain's. He would find a reason to pass the Queen's steps when there were people to hear, and he would perform the story of his heroism at the silent man as though the silence were applause. "You'd not have managed it, would you?" he said once, conversationally, "the way you might speak to a post you were tying a horse to. No, you'd have stood there. That is what you are for, standing there." And the guard stood there, and the captain smiled, and the visitors murmured, and I stood 3 paces back with my book and my burning face and said nothing, because I was a lieutenant of 2 years and no consequence, and the man humiliating a sergeant in front of the public was a captain with the controller's ear. I should tell you what made it worse, because it is the part that I, at least, could see, even if no one else troubled to. The story Locke told did not quite fit the man telling it. I had copied the duty roll for the rehearsal morning. I knew, because it was my job to know, that Captain Locke had been posted to the saluting dais, and the saluting dais is a good 80 yards up the approach from where the carriage was turned, on the wrong side, behind the rail. A man on the dais could no more have run down and taken a galloping lead horse's head than he could have flown. I noticed this the way you notice a stone in your boot, a small wrongness, easy to ignore, that you keep stepping on. I told myself I had the post wrong. I told myself the dais party must have moved. I told myself a great many things, because the alternative was that a captain of the household was standing on the Queen's steps every morning telling a lie to a man who was forbidden to call him one. The man who could have called him one said nothing. That is the heart of this, and I want you to feel the weight of it before I tell you how it came undone. Sergeant Vance knew. Of course he knew. He had been there. He, more than anyone alive, knew exactly what had happened on Coronation Approach and exactly who had done it. And every morning he stood on his post and let a man wear his deed like a borrowed coat, and never once, by the smallest sign, claimed it back. I thought at the time that it was only discipline, that the rules simply gave him no opening to speak. I have since decided it was something larger and colder and finer than discipline, but I am getting ahead of myself. The truth began to come apart, as these things do, over a piece of paper. 10 days after the rehearsal, the controller's office began assembling the commendation. This is the ordinary machinery of a great house. When something notable happens, a record is made, witnesses are taken, and in due course an honor may be recommended to the crown. Captain Locke wanted the honor very much. He had as good as ordered it into being by the relentless telling of his tale, and now the paperwork had to catch up to the legend. And the paperwork, it turned out, was my task. The controller handed me a thin folder and told me to gather the witness accounts of the Coronation Approach incident, copy them fair into the commendation book, and bring it to him sealed by Friday. "Captain Locke's account is there already," he said. "You will want the corroborating statements. Be thorough, Mr. Rain. A commendation that goes to the crown must be true in every particular." True in every particular. I have thought about that instruction many times since. I do not believe the controller meant anything by it but the ordinary care of an honest office. But he had handed a stone in the boot to the one clerk who had already felt it, and told him to walk on it until it could not be ignored. So I went looking for the witnesses, and the witnesses did not say what the captain said. The first was a crowd marshal who had stood at the rail by the bandstand. He told me the team had bolted, and a soldier had gone after it, one of the bearskins off his post, flat out. Not an officer, a bearskin. I wrote it down and felt the stone shift. The second was a footman who had been holding the carriage step. He said the same. The man who took the lead horse's head was the big sentry from the steps, and that an officer had been shouting from up by the dais but had not come down. The third was a groom from the royal stables, who knew horses the way I know my own name, and the groom said a thing I have never forgotten. "Whoever brought those greys round didn't fight them," he said. You can't fight 4 bolting horses, you'll be killed. He turned them. He got the lead head and he ran with them astride and turned the whole team into the soft, used their own weight against them. That's not strength. That's a man who has done it before and was not afraid. I've put 30 years on the box and I couldn't have done it cleaner. I asked him, with my heart going, whether it could have been an officer from the dais. He laughed at me, not unkindly. "Son," he said, "from the dais, you'd have time to take your hat off and say a prayer. You would not have time to run 80 yards. I had 4 accounts by the end of that day, and not one of them put Captain Locke's hands anywhere near those horses. Every one of them put a guardsman there, the same guardsman, the big one from the Queen's steps. And I sat in the controller's empty anteroom that evening with the witness statements squared in front of me and Captain Locke's own account on top of them. And I read the two against each other, and I understood at last that I was holding a lie in one hand and the truth in the other, and that I was the only person in the palace who knew it. I will be honest about what I felt, because it does no good to pretend I was brave. I was frightened. The easy thing, the thing every cautious instinct in me begged for, was to write the commendation the way the legend wanted it, bury the witness statements as supporting material, and let a captain have his medal. No one would ever check. The guard would never complain. The guard was forbidden to complain. I could keep my place and keep my peace and keep walking on the stone, and in a year I would not even feel it. That is how these things stay buried. Not through one great act of villainy, but through 100 small clerks deciding it is not their business. It became my business the next morning, and it became my business because of the order book. The order book is the spine of a guard's life. Every post, every relief, every duty is written into it in the duty officer's hand and signed, and it is the dullest and most sacred document in the regiment, because in a house where men may not explain themselves, the book is the only voice they have. I had been copying from it for a fortnight. And on that morning, hunting back through the rehearsal day entries to be thorough, to be true in every particular, I found the thing that ended the captain's story. It was not a grand thing. It was a single line in the duty officer's small square hand, timed and signed, an amendment to the posting for the rehearsal review. Sergeant F. Vance, the line read, reassigned from number 4 post to the river end barrier of Coronation approach for the duration of the mounted rehearsal by order to cover the carriage line. By order. Initialed. The duty officer had moved the best man he had down to the most dangerous stretch of the route, the carriage line, the very ground where the greys had bolted, because that is what you do with your steadiest sergeant when horses and crowds share a road. Vance had not been at the Queen's steps that morning at all. He had been standing exactly where a runaway team would come, because the order book had put him there by name, in advance, in the duty officer's own hand. And below it, in the after-action margin where a duty officer notes what came of his orders, a second line, added that same evening. Carriage team bolted on the approach, turned and held by SGT Vance at the barrier. No casualties. Conduct noted. Conduct noted, 2 words. The whole truth of it, written down by an honest man on the night it happened, 10 days before Captain Locke had begun to polish his version in the mess. The deed had a name on it. It had always had a name on it. It simply was not the name everyone had been saying. I sat there a long time with my finger on that line. I thought about the groom laughing at me, "You would not have time to run 80 yards. I thought about Locke at the Queen's steps, "You'd have stood there, that is what you are for." And I thought about the silent man taking it, morning after morning, with the order book's truth locked in his own chest and his discipline keeping the door. He could have ended it any day with one sentence. He had chosen instead to let the record speak for him in its own time, or not at all, to let the lie wear itself out, or to carry it forever, rather than break his post to defend his name. I did not understand a man who would do that. I am not sure I understand it now. But I knew, with my finger on that line, that I was not going to be the clerk who helped bury it. I made my copies. I made them fair and exact, every witness statement, the duty officer's order, the after-action note, and I made one more copy besides in my own hand of the captain's account, so that the two could be laid side by side and read by anyone with eyes. And then I did the only thing a lieutenant of no consequence could do. I took it up the chain. I asked to see the controller, and when his clerk asked the subject, I said, with my mouth dry, "The truth of the coronation approach commendation, sir. There is an error in it that must be corrected before it goes to the crown." I will not pretend the controller embraced me for it. He was a careful man and a fair one, and the first thing a careful, fair man feels when a junior tells him the great commendation is built on a lie is not gratitude. He read the witness statements with his face still as stone. He read the captain's account, and then I turned the order book around on his desk and put my finger on the duty officer's line, SGTF. Vance reassigned to the carriage line by order and on the after-action note below it, and I watched a man who had spent 30 years learning not to show what he felt fail for just a moment to hide it. He sat back. He looked at the line for a long while. "By order," he said quietly, almost to himself. It was written down. It was written down the whole time. He looked up at me, and no one read it because no one needed to read it. We had a captain telling us so loudly what was true that none of us thought to ask the book. He closed the order book gently, the way you close a thing you respect. "Thank you, Mr. Rain," he said. "You have done a hard and correct thing. Now we will do the rest of it correctly, which I am afraid will be harder still." The rest of it was done at the Founding Day Review itself, which I think the controller chose on purpose, though he never said so. Founding Day is the great review of the year, the whole regiment on the square, the household assembled, the crown's representative on the dais, the public packed to the rails, and the year's honors and commendations read aloud before all of it. Captain Locke had got his way at last. The coronation approach commendation was to be read on Founding Day, his name in it, before the entire house. He spent the week before walking very tall. He passed the Queen's steps twice that I saw, and both times he could not help himself. "Big morning coming," he told the silent sentry. "They'll read it out in front of the crown. Try to look pleased for me. It is the closest you'll come to one of these." And the guard, who I now knew was the man the commendation truly belonged to, who knew it too, who had read his own deed in the order book 100 times in his own silence. The guard stood there and gave the captain nothing and let him pass, and kept the secret one more day. I have wondered since whether Vance knew by then that it was coming undone. I think he must have. The palace is a small place under its grandeur, and a thing cannot move through the controller's office without the regiment feeling the air shift. But if he knew, he gave no more sign of it than he had given of anything else. He let the truth come to him the way he had let the lie come to him, without moving, without claiming, without a word. That, I have decided, is the difference between the two men, and it is the whole of the story. One of them needed everyone to know what he had done. The other did not need anyone to know at all. Founding Day broke gray and cold and perfect. The regiment formed up on the square in the early light, and the household took its place, and the public filled the rails until the railings groaned, and the band played and the colors came on, and it was, I will say, the finest sight I had then seen in my life. 300 men in red and black standing so still that the eye kept telling you they were a painting until one of them blinked. Captain Locke stood at the head of the household party in his gold-cuffed coat, chin up, waiting for his name. And Sergeant Vance stood where his rank put him in the ranks, anonymous in a line of anonymous men, a bearskin among bearskins, expecting nothing, which is what he had expected the whole time. The Crown's representative came to the commendations. An adjutant read them out, one by one, in the flat carrying voice they train into men for exactly this: a name, a date, a deed, a word of honor, and the man named would step one pace forward and be seen. They came at last to the coronation approach. The adjutant read it differently than the captain had written it. I knew he would. I had recopied it myself under the controller's eye, every word weighed. He read that on the morning of the mounted rehearsal a team of 4 had bolted on the approach toward a packed forecourt. He read that disaster had been averted, no life lost, by the action of one man. And then he read, in that flat carrying voice, into the great silence of 300 still men and 1,000 watching citizens, the thing the order book had said all along. By the duty order of that morning, the adjutant read, Sergeant Pharaoh Vance had been posted to the carriage line at the river end barrier of Coronation approach. When the team bolted, Sergeant Vance left the barrier, took the lead horse at the head, and turned the team from the crowd into the soft ground of the parade square, bringing all 4 down without loss of life. His conduct was noted in the order book on the evening of the day itself. The Crown commends Sergeant Pharaoh Vance. And then, after a pause that I will hear for the rest of my life, the account previously rendered to this office has been found to be in error and is withdrawn. I was watching Captain Locke. I could not help it. I had earned the right, I thought, to watch his face when it happened. He did not understand at once. He had been standing in the posture of a man about to step forward, weight already shifting, the small proud smile already arranged, and the name that was read was not his name. And for one whole second his face did not change because the words had not yet reached the part of him that knew. Then they reached it. I watched the smile die by stages. I watched him understand the order book had been read. I watched him understand the word withdrawn, spoken aloud before the Crown and the regiment and the public and every man he had ever told the tale to in the mess. He did not step forward. There was nowhere for him to step. He stood among the household party in his gold-cuffed coat, while 200 yards of red-end black silence understood, all at once and without a sound, exactly what kind of man had been standing in front of them telling them what he was. And down in the ranks, a bearskin stepped 1 pace forward. He did it the way he did everything, without flourish, without expression, a single square pace, eyes forward, the same step 300 men had drilled 10,000 times. He did not look at the captain. He did not look at the crowd. He stood 1 pace out from the line with his deed read true over him at last and his name in the air, and he gave no more sign of triumph than he had ever given of injury. The Crown's representative inclined his head to him. The adjutant moved on to the next commendation. And Sergeant Pharaoh Vance stepped 1 pace back into the line and became, once more, a bearskin among bearskins, indistinguishable from the men beside him, his face exactly as still as it had been when a captain told him to his face that standing there was all he was for. That is the picture I keep. Not the captain's ruin, though I will come to that. The man who had every right in that moment to turn his head and find the captain's eyes and let him see who had won and who did not. Who took the truth the way he had taken the lie, without moving, because to him they weighed the same. Nothing. He had not done it for the medal. He had done it because 4 horses were bolting toward a crowd and he had been posted to the line, and a man does the thing his post requires. The medal was an accident that happened to land on the truth 10 days late. He would have stood that barrier and turned those horses if no order book in the world had recorded it, if no clerk had ever gone looking, if Captain Locke had told the tale unchallenged for the rest of both their lives. The deed was complete the moment it was done. Everything after was only other people catching up. I should tell you what became of the captain because a 50-year-old man who has seen the world will want to know the wrong was answered, and it was. There was no scene. There is never a scene in a great house. The discipline that holds a sentry holds the whole place. But a commendation withdrawn before the Crown is a wound that does not close. The controller, who did not forgive a lie told to his office, made his inquiries quietly and completely, and what he found was that the Coronation approach was not the captain's first borrowed coat, only the first he had worn in front of the order book. Captain Locke did not appear at the next review, nor any after. He was found a posting far from the household, in a quiet place where there were no crowds to perform to and no silent men to perform at, and there, I am told, He grew old telling a smaller and smaller version of his tale to people who had not been at Founding Day, and who therefore could still be made to believe it. He had spent his whole life needing other men to know what he had done. In the end, he was given exactly that and nothing else. A small life lived entirely inside the telling of itself. I cannot think of a heavier sentence for a man like him. And the sergeant went back to the Queen's steps. Of course he did. The commendation changed nothing about his mornings. He stood number 4 post the next week as though the great square had never read his name aloud, rifle at the order, eyes on the middle distance, the medals somewhere in a drawer where medals go for men who do not need them. I went and stood near his post one gray morning in the weeks after, when I had screwed up the courage. I was still a lieutenant of 2 years and no consequence, and he was a sergeant who had been commended by the Crown, and I had no business with him at all except the business of a man who has learned something and must say so to the one who taught him. I could not speak to him on his post. I knew that much by then. But I had learned in my fortnight with the order book that there are ways to say a thing without breaking a man's silence, so I did the only thing I could think of. As I passed his box, I came to a halt, faced him square and saluted him, a lieutenant saluting a sergeant, which is not how the order of things runs, which is in fact precisely backward, and which I did anyway on purpose, full and slow and meaning every degree of it. I held it. He could not return it. A man on post does not. But I saw his eyes come off the middle distance for the first time in all the mornings I had watched him, come down and find mine, just for a moment, and I saw in them that he knew exactly what I was saluting and exactly why. Then his eyes went back to the middle distance, and I dropped my hand and I walked on, and neither of us ever spoke a word of it, then or after. I want to tell you before I close this about the one conversation I did have, not with the sergeant, who would never have permitted it, but with the captain, in the weeks between Founding Day and his quiet posting away. I had not sought it. A man who has helped pull the floor out from under a captain does not go looking for the captain afterward. He keeps to corridors the captain does not use and learns the hours the captain takes his meals. But the palace is a small place, as I have said, and one gray afternoon I came around the turn of the controller's stair with the order book under my arm, and there he was, coming down, and there was no corridor for either of us to take. He knew me. Of course he knew me. He had worked out, in the way a man works out the precise shape of his own ruin, that the lieutenant who carried the book was the lieutenant who had read it, and that the reading of it was the thing that had finished him. I braced for the storm, for the gold-cuffed arm and the carrying voice, and the whole performance turned at last on me. It did not come. He stopped 2 steps above me, and he looked at me the way you look at a sum you have done 100 times and cannot make come right, and what he finally said was not loud at all. "You found it in the book," he said. It was not a question. "Yes, sir," I said. "It was always in the book." "By order," he said, and I heard him taste the 2 words the way the controller had tasted them and find them just as bitter. He never said a word to me, not once. All those mornings I stood there and told him what he was, and he had the whole of it written down in his own keeping. He shook his head slowly. Why did he not simply say it? One sentence on any of those mornings, and I would have been finished where I stood, and he would have had his medal 6 weeks the sooner. Why did he let me go on? And here is the thing I have turned over more than any other in all the years since, because Captain Locke in his ruin had asked the one question I could not answer and have never stopped trying to. I did not have it then. I have something nearer to it now, and I will give it to you at the end. But on that stair all I could do was tell him the truth as far as I could see it. "I don't think he was letting you go on, sir," I said. "I don't think you were ever the thing he was attending to. I think he was attending to his post. You happened to be standing in front of it." He stared at me. I do not think anyone had ever put it to him quite that way, that the whole bright cruel performance he had built, morning after morning, the lording and the smiling and the borrowed coat, had not even registered with the man it was aimed at as a thing requiring an answer, that he had spent 10 days throwing himself against a wall that had not so much as noticed it was being struck. It is one thing to be defeated. It is another to learn that your opponent was never, for one moment in the contest. Something went out of his face then that I have never forgotten. Not anger, which he had in plenty, but a kind of vertigo, the look of a man who has just understood that the ground he built his house on was never his. He came down the last 2 steps past me without another word, and his shoulder did not so much as brush mine, and that was the last time Captain Locke and I ever stood in the same few feet of the world. I told the controller of it later because I had learned by then to tell him things. He heard me out, and he was quiet a moment, and then he said something I have kept. "You did him a kindness on that stair, Mr. Rain, though he'll never know it for one. You told him the true size of the thing he lost to. A small man can bear being beaten by a great rival. What he cannot bear is being beaten by a man who was simply doing his work and did not look up. That is the whole of the lesson if he had the wit to take it, which he had not." He turned a page of the very book that had undone the captain. The sergeant did not humble him. I have heard it said in the mess that Vance humbled Locke, and it is wrong, and you of all people should not let it be said in your hearing. Vance did nothing to him. Locke was humbled by the simple existence of a better man who wanted none of what Locke wanted, and there is no defense against that none, because there is no attack in it to parry. You cannot out-argue a man who is not arguing with you. You cannot outshout a wall. He spent 10 days at war with a man who was at peace, and a man at peace will win that war every single time without lifting his hand because he is not in it. He closed the book. Remember that when you have a desk of your own. The loud ones are always at war with someone. The ones worth having are at peace with the work. Learn to tell them apart in the dark before the order book has to tell you. I have tried to. I have not always managed it, but I will say this for the lesson. I have never again, in all my years, mistaken volume for substance, nor a man's certainty that he is the hero of a thing for any evidence that he is. I check the book. I have made it a kind of private religion, the checking of the book, not from suspicion of every man, but from the memory of how nearly an honest office handed a lie to the crown, because the lie was told with great confidence, and the truth was told in 2 words by a man who would not repeat himself. Conduct noted. The truest things are so often written smallest. Years have passed. I am no longer a lieutenant of no consequence. I have a desk and a name now and young officers who carry the order book for me, and when one of them stands too long in front of a silent sentry, I tell him this story, or enough of it. I tell them that the loudest man in the room is the one you should check the book on. I tell them that the order book is the regiment's voice for the men who are not allowed to use their own, and that you read it carefully, every line, true in every particular, because somewhere in that small square hand is the name that ought to be on the deed, written down on the night it happened by an honest man, waiting for someone with the nerve to read it aloud. I went back to the Queen's steps more than once in those after years, before my own duties carried me away from that part of the house. I never spoke to him on his post again. The one salute had been the whole of what could be said, and to add to it would have been to make it about me, which was the one thing it was not. But I would slow as I passed, and I would look, and I would find him exactly as he had always been, number 4 post, rifle at the order, eyes on the middle distance, a bearskin among bearskins, the crown's commendation no more present on him than the weather of last week. Once on a morning when the forecourt was empty and the light was thin, I saw a small boy stop in front of his box and ask him in the loud, fearless way of small boys whether it was true that he had stopped the runaway horses. The sergeant did not move. He did not answer. He could not. And the boy's mother drew him away, embarrassed, saying of course the soldier could not talk, and I watched the sergeant's face through the whole of it, and there was nothing in it at all, no pride that the boy had heard, no wish that he could say yes, nothing but the post. The deed was so wholly finished in him that even a child's wonder could not call it back up to the surface. I have met men who would have given a year of their lives to be asked that question by that boy. He had been given it, and it cost him nothing because it asked for nothing he still carried. And that in the end is my answer to the captain's question on the stair, The answer I did not have then and have spent the years since assembling. Why did he let me go on? Because to Sergeant Vance there was nothing to let. The captain imagined the two of them locked together in a contest over a single prize, the deed, the credit, the medal, the name, and imagined the sergeant graciously or stubbornly declining to seize his share of it. But there was no contest, because the sergeant did not want the prize and never had. You cannot let a man keep something you were never reaching for. Locke spent 10 days believing he was getting away with a theft, and the truth is colder and stranger than that. You cannot steal from a man what he does not hold. The honor was never in the medal or the commendation or the name read aloud. It was in the turning of 4 horses on a morning when it had to be done, and that the sergeant possessed entire, the instant it was over, beyond the power of any captain or any clerk or any crown to add to it or take it away. Locke could have told his tale unchallenged until they were both old men, and Vance would have lost exactly nothing, because the only thing that could be taken by the telling was a thing the sergeant had already declined to value. The captain was not robbing the guard. He was robbing himself every morning of the one thing he wanted most and could not counterfeit, the quiet of a man who has done a true thing and needs no one to know it. That is the secret the order book kept, and it is a larger secret than a name. The name was the small truth, whose hands were on the horses, which the book recorded and the adjutant read out and the world in the end learned. But under it was the truth I have spent a life learning, which no book records because no book has to. That the loud man and the silent man are not 2 soldiers competing for one honor, but 2 entirely different ideas of what honor is, and only one of them is real. One believes honor is a coat the world hands you, and can be made to hand you by sufficient noise. The other knows it is a thing you either did or did not do, on the day, with your hands, and that the world's knowing has nothing to do with it. The order book in its small square hand only ever wrote down the first. The second it could not write, because the second was not in the captain's account or the witness statements or the after-action note. It was in 1 square pace out of the line and 1 square pace back, given by a man to whom vindication weighed exactly what insult had weighed, which is to say nothing, because his honor had never once been out on loan. But mostly I tell them about the 1 pace, the single square step out of the line and back into it, by a man who had been wronged in front of everyone and vindicated in front of everyone, and let neither of them move him a hair's breadth more than the drill required. I tell them that is what discipline is, and that I had it backward for the first 2 years of my life. I thought discipline was the thing that kept the sentry from answering the captain. It is not. Discipline is the thing that let a man stand still while another wore his honor like a borrowed coat, and stand just as still when the coat was taken off the thief and laid, at last, on the right shoulders, because he had never once believed his honor was a thing that could be worn by anyone but the man who earned it, on the morning he earned it, whether the world ever knew his name or not. The world did learn his name, in the end. It was written in the book the whole time. Someone only had to read whose name was really on the order, and the man whose name it was never once looked up to see them do it, which is the surest sign there ever was that the book had it right.